Russia is, and always has been, and will be an aggressive country by nature, which can exist only when it attacks neighboring countries.
I could not permit myself to work with the government of the aggressor state. I could even say that I knew that this would result in the filing of a criminal case.
In prison, I wondered to myself, why has the world once again allowed fascism to rear its ugly face? Fascism continues.
The Russian Federation, in the form of its punitive agencies, the FSB and the Interior Ministry, takes Ukrainian citizens hostage to resolve their internal and external issues. These are activists with a significant public stance. As a rule, these are citizens of Ukraine who are Crimean Tatars by birth. The Crimean Tatar people went through a difficult period. During the entire period of their stay in the Russian Empire, they always had problems with the Russian government. And only under Ukraine, the Crimean Tatars were able to revive their cultural societies and public associations, which would form the basis of statehood, Majlis, Kurultai, and with the return of Russian control over Crimea in 2014, everything was put back into the dreadful past, and the Crimean Tatars once again found themselves in the powerful and painful vice of the stringent control regime of the Russian government.
I am proud of my state and the Ukrainian people, because I know that in such difficult and short period of time, dealing with war on their territory, they proved to the world that no one can trample down the people's dignity, honor, history, and the state of these people with impunity.
From October to November of 2013 and until February of 2014, all these pro-Russian separatist movements have been highly intensified in Crimea. We as Crimean Tatars, as the indigenous people, actively opposed these separatists. And on February the 25th, we learned that there would be a meeting of the Supreme Council of Crimea and that there is a plan to approve an appeal on behalf of the Supreme Council of the Russian Federation, a direct intervention in the territory of Crimea. We decided that in the morning of February the 26th, we will convene a protest rally, which we basically managed to do. And the separatists and groups of bandits did not prevent this from happening. They simply could not prevent it, but the session did not take place.
On this day, it seemed to us that we were defending the territorial integrity of Ukraine. In the evening, saying goodbye to each other, we said, well, now there will be no separatist statements in the Supreme Council for about 10 years. But it turned out quite the opposite.
On January the 29th, I was arrested, and my question was, what are they charging me for? Investigator Aziz Bulatov, and I was shocked by this. He said, for the events of February the 26th. I said, well, let's see what happens. Because, in general, there could not be anything resembling a crime in these events. In its pure form, it was a political event, and those processes were simply politically motivated.
On March 18th, a decree was signed in the State Duma of the Russian Federation to annex two new entities, the Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, to the Russian Federation. Of course, I renounced the fact that I was tried for having my own opinion and that the formal reason was participation in the television program on the ATR channel on March 19, 2016, in which I allegedly called for violating the territorial integrity of the Russian Federation.
Emir Hussein is a very active public activist, not only in the village in which we live in Kyiv, but also in Yalta. He was also a human rights activist. He was engaged in human rights activities before the occupation, when Crimea became Russia and people began to disappear systematically, mostly young people, and Emir Hussein, of course, did his part. And he did not think of leaving. Not having committed anything criminal, he thought that there would not be any arrests and no criminal cases would be opened.
This is the first category. The second category is active citizens of Ukraine who are not significant, but they express their public stance somewhere in the social networks. A striking example is Pavlo Hryb, who was simply marked on the internet as a public activist, as a person with a certain stance, and a special operation was carried out to take him to the territory of the Russian Federation.
After graduating from school, Pavlo enrolled at the Kyiv Mohila Academy in the Faculty of Philosophy. He had no long-term vision as he had just graduated from high school the previous year and only just began his studies at university. So he had no idea which profession he would choose. But he saw himself doing something for Ukraine and being patriotically oriented. I must emphasize once again that his formation as an individual started from the time of the Revolution of Dignity. But he was very active on social media, from what I've seen. He supported independence in various ways, in various groups, and he staunchly opposed Russia's military aggression against Ukraine. This served as the factor that led him to being under the observation of Russia's special services.
I love you very much. I never want to part with you. But here, in the Russian prison, it seems to me that life is too short.
Valentin could say what he thought, what he saw and wrote, and also communicated with Russian people who were there in social networks. And I even made a remark to him, do not say things so boldly. But he did not like when I dictated to him. Valek did not like this. He said, Mom, I will deal with it myself. I have my own opinion, and I will express this opinion as I wish, and when and where I want to.
The Russian Federation's services, in fact, make a show out of detentions in Crimea. As a rule, it is viciously demonstrated in order to satisfy the so-called animal instincts of the crowd and to show them, you see, we will treat our enemies viciously to the extreme, and to intimidate them at liberty, saying, you see, this is exactly how we will treat you.
Not those are judged who had goals and intentions to change the territorial integrity of Ukraine, who subsequently kidnapped and killed people, illegally vested themselves in authority to rule and judge. Judged are those who defended the laws of the state, international norms, and rules.
When I was in Crimea and arrested, I actually thought I was kidnapped because there were, I do not remember, 5 or 6 of these people in masks with no markings and were in a civilian minibus. We knew that people on such minibuses kidnap our compatriots and they disappear without a trace. It was all happening literally 50 meters away from the former Security Service of Ukraine building. They put a sack over my head and put me in a van. They drove around for 40 minutes, and when they brought me into the basement, I took the sack off my head. I realized that I was in the SBU building because I had been there before. And I also realized that the order was not to kill. I read a prayer silently because at that moment I was thinking about how to be courageous in front of those scum who show their strength and show that they can easily take your life.
It's a common and absolutely legal practice for the FSB to beat people before searching them. At least that's what the Crimean police think.
The search was quite vicious. They broke down the door, not waiting until we opened it. After bursting into the house, they grabbed Amir Hussein and immediately put him on the floor, handcuffed him, and read his decree. They turned everything upside down, starting from the kitchen, refrigerator, and freezer, and finishing with the clothing basket and children's room. We're not told where he's being transported. They just said, give us your number, we'll be in touch. He was taken away, and a few hours later I got a call, and they said that I would need a lawyer for my husband, who was in the Simferopol office of the FSB. Since then, Amir Hussein has been sitting in a Remand prison for 1 year and 9 months.
If someone becomes the object of interest of the special services of the Russian Federation in mainland Ukraine, he or she is carefully studied. They study his or her contacts, primarily in social networks. They study the possibility of his or her trips as we now know, not only in Russia, but also in the Republic of Belarus. They study the network of acquaintances, the possibility of introducing into the network of your acquaintances of some provocators who can offer them some kind of profitable work or some kind of favorable acquaintance. Perhaps this was the case of Pavlo Hryb. This was unrequited love, as for a young boy.
Pavlo chatted online and took part in social media as far back as 2014. During one correspondence, he got to know a girl from the Russian Federation. She supported his vision, attitudes, and views toward Ukraine. They began to chat often. Their correspondence was under the observation of the Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation, and they arranged that he go meet with that girl in the city of Homel in the Republic of Belarus. As it turned out, the intelligence services of the Russian Federation used this girl as a trap. After Pavlo met with the girl, he was detained by some unidentified individuals and was taken to a forest with a sack over his head. He was then handed to another group of unknown people who took him to the Smolensk Oblast, where a detention report was formally filed.
Russia considers me, as well as each Ukrainian, an enemy in every respect.
A young man went to Crimea to meet with a girl named Natasha. This was all orchestrated by the FSB. Natasha was the front person and decoy to lure him onto Crimean territory, where they could easily kidnap him. And he came and told me about this girl, because she came here to Ukraine once or twice, and they met and chatted. And once he said to me, "It's amazing to me that a girl is knowledgeable in aviation. We have plenty to talk about." And they had a meeting in a cafe where they were just sitting and talking. Then some unknown guy suddenly knocked Pavlo off his chair and immediately put handcuffs on him, put a sack over his head, took him to a waiting room in the airport, put him on a plane, and there he began beating him. He was beaten by 2 agents, one at a time. Then they brought him into some basement, where they continued beating him all night. Then in the morning they put him in this prison van and drove him out of Moscow. Then in the morning they put him in this prison van and drove him out of Moscow. He was taken to a forest where they took the sack off his head. 4 agents stood before him, holding their gun holsters, thus imitating a kill. And when I asked, "Son, were you sorry about anything? Was it scary?" He replied, "It was not scary, Mom. I was only afraid I would never see you again, and my son."
Twice, I thought that I would be killed. At least everything looked that way. And it's necessary to have nerves of steel to experience all this without psychological consequences.
In the Russian Federation, earlier in the Soviet Union, and even in the times of the Russian Empire, there were several distinct stages of attempts to break a person. If the detained person agreed to cooperate with the state authorities, the conditions of his or her detention improved, and everyone knew about this. If the Kremlin prisoner did not agree to cooperate, and on the contrary, the Kremlin had some problems due to that person, especially if they pertain to foreign policy, everything possible was done to humiliate this person. It was like some kind of a steady machine that had never stopped moving.
The first 10 days I spent in a solitary confinement cell. Concrete walls, a concrete floor, a plank bed, no lighting, dampness, and thin broth of food. From there, they transported me to the pretrial detention center. They did not put me in general cells so that I would be isolated. I spent half a year there and seemed to have gotten used to these horrible conditions. For father, mother, it was certainly unbearable. When the first time they came to the pretrial detention center, my parents and I realized that we may not see each other again. The second meeting with my mother was 2 years later. She was in a hospital bed when they brought for 10 days in handcuffs and with a sack over my head. A few days later, she died. All these emotions and unnerving experiences worsened her disease. In the end, I was not allowed to peacefully bury my mother.
Nothing broke the will of the Crimean Tatar people. Nothing could destroy their identity and love for their homeland, for their land, passed down from generation to generation.
In short, these are non-human conditions. This is an old prison for 800 inmates, and currently there are around 2,000 of them. Needless to say, the cells are overcrowded and there are no normal sanitary conditions. Also, the main point is that he's Muslim, but they don't care about this, and he is fed pork. When my husband wrote a complaint that his religious faith did not allow him to eat pork and asked them to take this into account, he was fed pork 3 times a day, even for breakfast.
The FSB investigator who was conducting the case for some reason decided to perform a psychiatric examination on me. During the trial, I had a hypertensive crisis. My blood pressure rose to 270 millimeters, and they called an ambulance, which immediately took me away to the hospital. The presiding judge in the case decided to perform the psychiatric examination in my absence. Then, when my state somewhat, I was discharged from this department.
Выписали из этого отделения и перевезли сотрудники ФСБ.
The FSB officers transported me to a closed-type psychiatric clinic, the so-called ward for those being examined. They placed me in this room, announcing to the whole world about it, but there was no door in this separate room. Well, in general, I would call the 21 days that I spent in this room a period of great torture.
Today in Crimea, those who betrayed Ukraine judge those who did not. Traitors are judging patriots.
They were brought here to the prison in Kyiv to jail, placed in a cell in which it was not possible to place a bed or a chair, and he had to walk on his feet until 6 o'clock in the evening. Then they turned on some loud music, and everything said in the songs glorified Putin, his regime, and other such Soviet songs from which, as he said, I was already sick, weak, and torn into pieces.
Pavlo is ill and needs to constantly take certain medications. He should always have a proper diet, but they do not have such a diet in the prison in Russia. We asked his lawyer how he feels, and the lawyer said he is not in very good condition. The lawyer noticed that something was wrong with Pavlo's memory. The lawyer said, when I said something to him, he could not recall what I said later on. When they asked him where he was born, he mentioned a totally different city.
The system of the courts of the Russian Federation is built and controlled entirely vertically, from the bottom to the top, by the authorities, who have no relation to the judicial branch of power. And if the decision is made to put someone in jail, then before the document is issued, the prosecutor's office passes down the final sentence. This is not justice, it's just a method of punishment.
My cousin phoned me and said, I just saw on TV that Valentin was sentenced to 11 years in a maximum security, strict regime prison camp. We believed it, and we also didn't believe it. We were not ready for such news.
January the 29th, I was arrested. It was 2015, and only in August or July, the first interrogation was held, and all the materials of the case were dated after January the 29th. They just took me on the order, then they accused me, and only after that did they put together the materials of the case. For organizing the riots on February the 26th, under Article 212, Section 1, as an organizer, I was sentenced to 8 years of imprisonment. But I did not care how many years they would give me, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. I did not expect to get out of prison alive at all.
I was mentally preparing for the maximum term. The judge did not refer either to the investigation or to the prosecution's accusation, but took responsibility personally by writing the phrase, "The totality of the statements proves public appeals to violate the territorial integrity of the Russian Federation."
Публичные призывы к нарушению территориальной целостности Российской Федерации.
And he announced 2 years of imprisonment and 2 years of a real term. In other words, the judge announced a tougher sentence than the prosecutor requested on behalf of the state.
In the events of February-March 2014, the overwhelming majority of Crimean Tatar people showed their determined civic position of adherence to the integrity of Ukraine, and is still not changing it.
At 7 in the morning, 5 or 6 workers in the detention center entered my cell and told me with such dumbfounded eyes that I was being released.
On October 12th, guests from Moscow came to my house, 2 FSB officers who told that there is an agreement between the President of Turkey and the Russian President about 2 people who will be released, Artem Chigos and Ilmi Umerov.
And then they put me in the back in a dark minibus in which there were again unidentified people sitting with these masks and a balaclava. I was brought to the airport, an ambulance came, and I still was thinking, yeah, they wanted me to be put on the plane and to register that I was in good health. Usually such reassurance never meant anything good. I later learned that Umerov was in this ambulance, I guessed because I saw him on the plane. Then they brought us to Anapa. By the way, they were very harsh during the ride. We were not allowed to communicate. They put him in another place. They did not even give us a chance to say hello, and they made some remarks to him.
The route was over the sea and above the land. When the plane landed, nobody announced this fact to us, but the settlements below were very colorful, unlike those in the former Soviet Union. All houses had red roofs and mosques. It looked like Turkish architecture. Why I was taken out of Crimea, I honestly did not understand until now. Nobody talked to me about it. I did not give anyone permission to take me out. I did not ask for anything.
Why is it freedom? What kind of freedom is this? If they evicted me from my home, and they did not even let me go home, from jail. Yes, to Turkey, and from there I later come to my native country. And I still do not see, I'm already out of prison, and I do not see my children or my father.
This situation, where people were captives of the Kremlin, this is not a system. This is just a case in which it was necessary to resolve some particular matters. It is some kind of separate task.
The Crimean Tatar people are defending the security of the entire civilized world here. If Russia's aggression against Ukraine and Crimea remains unpunished, it will set a precedent for the collapse of the entire world order.
Only a month and a half later, a court proceeding on his detention was held. And that's when we learned what Pavlo was being charged with. Apparently, Article 205, Clause 1, is a terrorist act. You know, it would be funny if it had not been so bitter. They charged him with planning an explosion at a school assembly and talking the girl he was communicating with via the internet into helping him blow up the school assembly. That is complete idiocy and total absurdity. At
the beginning, the children were very happy, waiting for the court hearing, because they thought that there would be a trial. Their father would be set free and we would all return home. Seeing that from meeting to meeting we returned home alone and they no longer asked anything. Then we rushed to the court because from the corridor we were not allowed to enter the courtroom. We saw how he was being escorted and could not even greet him. Sophia even proudly remembers that she even managed to touch her father. These were the years and months of separation from Amir Hussein. It was very difficult in the beginning. And you know, now it's very difficult because you always wait for something to end and hope that something will change, but nothing changed.
Once, 70 years ago, in the Urals, the folk song Oro Dacha was born, where our people in places of exile, through such songs, expressed the pain about our motherland and the burden that they endured. They themselves, their children, grandchildren. This is the sorrow of loss and death of a loved one during exile in the Urals. I asked the question, why did the world allow this fascism again? Why?
Pavlo Hryb is under arrest at a pre-trial detention facility. The next court hearing is scheduled for March 4th. Visits of professional doctors and delivery of necessary medicines are prohibited. Pavlo's health is critical. Amir Hussein Kuku was taken out of Crimea to the Russian Federation. He's currently in a Krasnodar pre-trial detention facility where he's being tortured. Russian officials refuse to comment on this information. Valentin Behivsky is serving a sentence imposed by a Russian court in one of the forced labor camps of the Kyiv region, Russia. If nothing changes, he will be free in 2026. Ilmi Umerov and Artem Chigos are in Ukraine. They demand from the Russian authorities to see the text of the decree on the basis of which they were evicted from the Crimea. The Russian authorities forbid them to return to their homeland. February 26, 2014 was the day when the inhabitants of the Ukrainian Crimea got the last chance to freely express their political views. After Russia captured the peninsula, social activism faced a ban. Oleg Sentsov, a Ukrainian director, was arrested on charges of preparing a terrorist attack. The Russian court issued an unprecedentedly harsh sentence: 20 years in a maximum security penal colony, 3 of which Oleg has already served. If nothing changes, he will be released in 2035. Alexander Kolchenko was arrested along with Sentsov. The investigation argued that Alexander and Oleg planned the terrorist attack together. His sentence also did not reflect the adequacy of a judge. 10 years of hard labor. Another charge was fabricated for the activist Volodymyr Balukh, felony weapons and ammunition. Despite the lack of evidence, Volodymyr received 3 years and 7 months as a punishment. He is currently in a penal establishment. The activist Volodymyr Balukh was only guilty of having a Ukrainian flag and a memorial plaque with the inscription "Street of the Heavenly 100 Heroes, 18" on his house. Mykola Semena, a Ukrainian journalist, got in the grip of the Crimean occupation authorities after he published an article on the internet. In its text, the court found non-existent calls to violate the territorial integrity of Russia. Mykola was handed 2.5-year suspended sentence with a ban on public activities. In fact, the man was thrown idle and prevented from leaving the occupied Crimea. At present, international human rights organizations consider at least 67 citizens of Ukraine to be the political prisoners of the Kremlin. Since the beginning of Russian aggression, their number only increases.